My parents begged me to keep the secret, but it's burning a hole in my chest. Because if I stay silent, she wins. And I can't let her win. Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day. At our family barbecue, everything turned into chaos in a single breath. My wife, who had been calm all morning, suddenly stood up from her chair, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard before. Zeus. Attack. Our German shepherd bolted like lightning, launching straight at my sister. His teeth clamped onto her arm and her scream tore through the air as she fell backward off the picnic bench. Blood soaked through her shirt so fast it turned my stomach. I tackled Zeus off her, my kids bolting inside in tears, while my parents shouted at my wife like she'd lost her mind. My mother was crying into the phone, begging 911 for help, sobbing that her daughter-in-law had sicked a dog on her own sister-in-law. My dad pressed dish towels against my sister's arm, but the fabric turned red instantly. My sister was writhing on the ground, screaming that my wife had always been jealous of her, while cousins stood frozen, some of them filming on their phones. I caught sight of my 8-year-old daughter peeking out from the window, her eyes wide with terror as she watched her aunt bleed out on our patio. I grabbed my wife by the shoulders, demanding to know what the hell was wrong with her. Why would she do this? Why attack my sister, someone who'd been nothing but helpful with our kids? The neighbors rushed over, only to stop short at the sight of blood pooling across the concrete. One even muttered they'd testify in court that my wife had given the attack order, completely unprovoked. My brother-in-law was hysterical, calling her a would-be murderer. And in the middle of all that chaos, my wife's voice broke through, low, trembling, but sharp enough to cut glass. I found videos on Sophie's phone last night. The entire yard fell silent except for my sister's moans. What videos? I asked, my voice cracking. My wife's hands shook as she held up the phone. She's been recording herself touching our kids during babysitting. The world tilted sideways. She scrolled through files and I swear my knees almost gave out. Hours of footage, 6 hours, of Sophie making Olivia sit on her lap with no clothes, of her doing things to Ben I can't even repeat out loud. In the video, Olivia begged her to stop. My sister's voice whispered that it was their special secret. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened like I'd been kicked. My wife went on, her tears running fast. She'd found the videos at 3 a.m. when Sophie's phone lit up with a notification. She'd already called the police that morning, but they said the kids would need to be interviewed first, and she didn't want to traumatize them. She tried to tell me, but I'd brushed her off while setting up the grill. Now she was laying out everything she'd discovered, Sophie's journal with plans to frame me for the abuse. Edited videos where it looked like my kids were just crying while a shadowy adult voice coaxed them. Notes about calling CPS the next morning with an anonymous tip to get me arrested. And then she pulled out the journal pages, meticulous sickening details about how Sophie wanted kids of her own but didn't want pregnancy ruining her body. How my children were perfect and would be better off with her. She had step-by-step plans to plant evidence, practice scripts for the CPS call, even notes about which bruises she could photograph to pin on my wife. But it didn't stop there. She hid cameras in the kids' rooms, my wife whispered. And in ours. She showed us receipts from a storage unit, photos of a child's bedroom she'd been setting up with clothes and toys stolen from our house. Then she showed me hundreds of photos from Sophie's cloud, my children sleeping, completely unaware. And then I remembered how my wife always seemed tense before leaving the kids with Sophie on Thursdays. I'd ignored it. When Sophie arrived at the barbecue that day, she'd put her hands on Olivia's shoulders, whispering in her ear. My wife saw it. And that's when she snapped, knowing our kids were in danger again, right there at our family party. My sister's face went pale as my wife exposed everything. She tried to push herself up from the grass, blood running down her arm. And then she hissed at my wife, voice flat and cold. You stupid itch. Those kids love me more than you. Everyone would have believed me. Her hand inched toward the butcher knife lying greasy on the picnic table, right beside the steaks. Time froze. I kicked the table hard, sending plates and the knife skidding across the grass. Sophie lunged after it, but my brother-in-law grabbed her bleeding arm and I pinned her down from the other side. She thrashed beneath us, shrieking that we were all being tricked. My wife, voice cracking, called Zeus back. The dog obeyed reluctantly, tail stiff, eyes locked on Sophie as my wife led him into the garage. The barking didn't stop even as the door shut, echoing through the yard. My mother shrieked at us to let Sophie go, claiming this was assault, that we'd all end up in jail. My father stood like a wall in front of the house, blocking any path toward the children inside. Cousins were dialing frantically, recording everything. Mike was shouting into his phone that nobody would believe what he was seeing. Sophie kept twisting, her blood soaking into the grass, until I shouted in a voice I didn't even recognize. Everybody shut up and listen to my wife. The yard froze. My wife, hands trembling, held up Sophie's phone. One quick swipe and I saw enough, Olivia's terrified face, her small voice begging to stop. My stomach lurched. I released Sophie, stumbling into the bushes to vomit up the beer and chips I'd had earlier. My brother-in-law kept her pinned. My mother stared at the phone screen, face draining of color as my wife showed more. I grabbed the phone from her limp hands and spoke into it, voice cracking. We have evidence of child abuse. We need police here now. Not just an ambulance. The operator confirmed units were already en route, told us to secure the scene. And in that moment, with my wife clutching the evidence and my sister bleeding into the grass beneath us, I realized I had ignored every single warning sign. Sophie's voice cut through the chaos, shrill and desperate, trying to claw her way out of the corner she was backed into. She shouted over everyone, insisting my wife had planted everything, that the videos, the journals, the receipts were all part of some twisted plan. She accused my wife of being jealous of her bond with the kids, claimed she'd been plotting this whole thing for weeks. And then she pointed at Zeus's attack as proof my wife was unhinged. I watched the neighbors shift uneasily, whispering among themselves. Mrs. Peterson actually stepped back like she wasn't sure who to believe. For a split second, doubt hung in the air. But my wife didn't waste breath arguing. She just opened Sophie's journal, holding up a page covered in Sophie's handwriting. The neighbors leaned in, eyes scanning the words. Their faces soured, turning from skepticism to horror. And in that moment, the truth weighed heavier than Sophie's lies. I couldn't stand there any longer. My kids were still alone inside, and all I could picture was their tiny faces, scared and confused. I bolted through the back door and raced upstairs. Their bedroom door was closed. When I pushed it open, I found them huddled in the closet, Olivia clutching Ben as he sobbed into her shirt. I locked the door from the inside and sank down onto the closet floor with them. My voice shook as I promised they were safe now, that Aunt Sophie was sick and getting help. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Olivia's eyes, wide and wet, searched mine. Is Zeus in trouble for biting Aunt Sophie? She whispered. I pulled her close. No, baby. He was protecting you. He's a good dog. Ben didn't look up. He buried his face deeper into his sister's shirt, shaking. Then the sound of sirens grew louder, closing in. I told them we'd stay right here until everything was okay. Through the window, I saw strangers in uniforms moving across our yard, paramedics speaking calm, practiced words, police officers scanning the scene. Sophie's voice carried even over the commotion, still trying to spin her story. It's all a misunderstanding, she cried. One officer cut her off, voice cold. Save it for your lawyer. I watched as paramedics wrapped Sophie's arm, the bandages already staining red. My wife was by the fence, her voice steady, handing over Sophie's phone, the journal, pointing out where she'd found the hidden cameras. I caught fragments of her recounting how she'd discovered everything at 3 a.m., how she'd called for advice at 6 a.m., how I'd brushed her off at 9 because I was too busy setting up tables. And then came a chilling shift. Sophie, once screaming, turned eerily calm. She spoke with a flatness that made my blood run cold. Was it because she knew she was caught, or because she didn't care anymore? Officers scribbled notes while my wife showed them the receipts, the screenshots, the plans. I stood frozen at the window, watching paramedics wheel Sophie toward the ambulance. Her eyes locked on my wife. The kids are mine, she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. They'll always be mine. The paramedic shoved her inside and slammed the doors, but her words clung to the air like smoke. The entire yard went silent. 2 officers followed my wife into the house, photographing the hidden cameras she'd found in our bedroom and the kids' rooms. Each device sealed in its own evidence bag. They collected Sophie's journal, her phone, the laptop with the screenshots my wife had taken. Every item tagged and logged like pieces of a nightmare. About an hour later, a woman in a gray suit arrived. Detective Leah Wainwright. She moved like she owned the ground beneath her feet. Within minutes, she had taken charge, assigning tasks, asking sharp, precise questions. She had my wife sit down at the picnic table and walk her through the timeline, finding Sophie's phone at 3 a.m., calling the advice line at 6, trying to tell me at 9. A man typed furiously beside her as she dictated every detail. Then she had their tech guy pull up metadata, verifying timestamps on every file. Nothing was left to chance. 2 hours after the attack, another man arrived in a polo with a CPS badge clipped to his belt. Carlos Pike. He told us flatly, Sophie could have no contact with kids. Our children would need forensic interviews, special sessions in child-friendly centers where professionals would gather their statements without influence. He warned us not to ask the kids any questions ourselves. One wrong word could damage the case. He handed us a card with the name Ramona Conrad written neatly on it. Then came animal control. A man named Aziz Branch with a worn clipboard and a serious face. He inspected Zeus from the garage window, measuring his teeth against the photos of Sophie's wound. He wrote it all down, handed me papers, and told me Zeus had to stay confined for 10 days until a hearing decided if he was dangerous. The thought of losing him on top of everything else, it made me want to punch through a wall. Meanwhile, my parents were unraveling in the driveway. My dad muttered that he'd seen red flags, Christmas, family reunions, birthdays, times Sophie got a little too close to the kids. He admitted he'd ignored it. My mom shook her head, refusing to believe, grasping for excuses. She must be sick. She needs help. This can't be her. My dad snapped at her to stop making excuses. That night, when the house finally emptied of uniforms and flashing lights, silence felt heavier than the chaos had. My wife couldn't even step foot in our room. She curled up in the guest bed while I lay stiff on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every Thursday night for the past 2 years. Every time she'd said, let's skip bowling. Every time I'd brushed her off. Every time I'd trusted Sophie with my kids. The guilt pressed down on me like a truck. At dawn, my phone buzzed. Dad. He never called early. His voice sounded older, broken. He said he'd been up all night, making a list, every family he could remember Sophie volunteering to help with. Cousin Janet's twins. The neighbor's daughter. The Mitchell kids from church. He kept going, naming birthday parties, reunions, playdates. Times Sophie offered to supervise. Times no one questioned her. By the time he finished, the list had 17 names. 17. He told me he'd already called Detective Wainwright at 5:30 a.m., left her a voicemail because he couldn't wait. As if on cue, my phone beeped with another call. Detective Wainwright herself. Her voice was brisk, urgent. She said a judge had signed an emergency warrant at sunrise. They were locking down Sophie's cloud storage before anything could be wiped. She was on her way to the storage facility on Route 9 with a forensic team and a child advocacy specialist to catalog whatever they found. I could hear car doors slamming and voices in the background as she spoke. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. Carlos Pike called just as I was pouring coffee, his voice steady but urgent. He reminded us that Olivia and Ben's forensic interviews were scheduled for the next morning with Ramona Conrad at the Child Advocacy Center downtown. He stressed again that we couldn't ask the kids a single question about what Sophie had done. Not one. Even a casual "what happened?" could ruin their testimony, make it inadmissible in court. He told us Ramona was the best in the state, trained specifically to handle cases where the abuser was a family member. That thought made my stomach twist, but at the same time I felt some relief knowing someone this skilled would be guiding them through. Upstairs, I heard my wife moving around, her footsteps heading toward the garage. Through the kitchen window, I saw her sitting on the floor with her back against the door, talking softly to Zeus. She was apologizing for making him hurt someone, but thanking him too for protecting our babies when she didn't know what else to do. She was recording herself on her phone, a voice memo. "In case the lawyers ask why I gave that command," she whispered, her voice trembling. Zeus whined and scratched at the door, desperate to be with her. She stayed there for over an hour, telling him over and over that he was a good boy, that none of this was his fault, that she'd protect him no matter what, even if it meant going to jail. Around 9, Detective Wainwright called. They'd found the storage unit. And it was worse. So much worse. The whole place was staged like a child's bedroom. Disney princess sheets on a twin bed, stuffed animals lined up neatly, bins labeled with our kids' names filled with clothes she'd stolen from our house. Ben's preschool drawings we thought were lost. Olivia's favorite purple jacket that had gone missing last winter. Even their toothbrushes in a little bathroom caddy. The forensic team photographed everything. Officers cataloged each item one by one. Then Wainwright told me about a folder they'd found, printouts of real estate listings in Oregon. Sophie had been planning to take them there to raise them in that staged room once she had custody. The tech guy confirmed the timestamps on the videos matched every Thursday night she'd babysat. The hidden cameras were purchased with Sophie's credit card 6 weeks ago, shipped directly to that storage unit address. Installation instructions printed, highlighted. Web searches about avoiding detection. Which states had the weakest child protection laws? Online forums asking for tips about documenting neglectful parenting to build a custody case. Every breadcrumb pointed to months, years of premeditated planning. An hour later, another call. This time it gutted me. They'd found an external hard drive hidden in the storage unit. More videos. Some over a year old, back when Ben was only 3. Detective Wainwright didn't give details, but her voice was tight when she said federal charges were certain. Sophie had backed everything up to cloud servers, meaning she'd been creating and distributing child exploitation material across state lines. The FBI's Crimes Against Children unit was coming in. This wasn't just our family anymore. This was national. My phone rang again. HR from my company. They'd seen the news coverage of the dog attack at a family barbecue. They put me on emergency family leave immediately, offered counseling services for all of us, warned me reporters were already calling co-workers. Security was on alert. While I was still jotting down the leave paperwork info, another call came through. Blocked number. A man's voice, cold, rehearsed, Sophie's attorney. He launched straight into threats of a civil suit, claiming my wife had ordered a premeditated mauling with a trained attack dog. Said Sophie had permanent nerve damage, might never regain use of her hand, would need years of therapy. He talked about damages, about lawsuits. Before I could even respond, another call beeped in. The district attorney's office. Prosecutor Esteban Rarin himself. His first words were blunt. "Do not speak to Sophie's lawyer." Not one word. He said he was personally taking over the criminal case. He assured me my wife's decision to command Zeus would be defended as a necessary action to stop an immediate threat to the kids. 3 days later, we drove to the Child Advocacy Center. My hands shook on the wheel while my wife clutched the folder of paperwork. Olivia asked why we had to talk to strangers. Ben stared out the window, sucking his thumb, a habit he'd dropped years ago. The center looked like a cheerful house from the outside, with bright walls and a playground, but walking in I felt sick. Knowing what my children would have to describe behind those walls twisted my gut. Ramona Conrad met us in jeans and a soft sweater, kneeling down to their level. She spoke gently, explaining the rooms with toys and art supplies, how they'd just play and talk while mommy and daddy waited nearby. My wife and I sat in a viewing room with a two-way mirror. Cartoons played on mute as we watched Olivia sit cross-legged on the floor with Ramona, coloring while they talked. My daughter's face changed the moment Sophie's name came up. Her coloring got harder, faster, her shoulders tightening. The interview lasted 3 hours, with breaks for snacks. Twice I had to step out and vomit when I saw Olivia using dolls to demonstrate. Ben's turn was shorter but cut deeper. He hid under the table when certain questions came. Ramona never pushed, just used puppets to help him find words he couldn't speak. When it was over, Ramona emerged composed, but her jaw was tight. She told us our kids had been incredibly brave. Their statements were consistent with the evidence. That consistency, she said, would be powerful in court. Carlos Pike met us in the lobby, updating the safety plan. No extended family could have unsupervised contact, not until background checks and training were complete. Thanksgiving, Christmas, canceled. That night, my mother broke down. She sobbed over the phone, confessing she'd once seen bruises on Ben's thighs during a sleepover 6 months ago. Sophie had brushed it off, playground accident. My mother had believed her. Now she was unraveling, replaying every moment, every excuse. Asking how she could have raised someone capable of this. The next morning, another call from Detective Wainwright. Her voice was clipped, almost shaking with contained fury. The digital forensics team had uncovered Sophie's activity in online predator forums. 2 years of posts, asking how to gain parents' trust, how to normalize touching, how to discredit children if they spoke up. These weren't just crimes. This was strategy. A network. That afternoon, Sophie was formally charged. 12 counts, including sexual abuse of minors and production of child exploitation material. Conspiracy for her plan to frame my wife. Federal charges for moving abuse material across state lines. Her bail, $500,000. Conditions, GPS ankle monitor, no contact with minors, no internet, no passport. And still, the only thing echoing in my head was her voice from the ambulance. Asterisk, the kids are mine. They'll always be mine. Asterisk. My wife and I both started therapy the following week. Separate offices, same counseling center. In my first session, my therapist nailed me right away. She said I had a conflict minimization habit from childhood. I'd been trained to keep the peace at any cost. And predators? They thrive in families like that. Sophie had counted on me to brush things off, to wave my wife's worries away. And I had. Over and over again. Later, in our couples session, we got referred to Chia Bergman, a specialist in child victims of family abuse. The receptionist even called our insurance while we sat there, and to my surprise, they said they'd cover unlimited sessions given the circumstances. For once, something worked in our favor. Meanwhile, our lawyer warned us about Zeus's animal control hearing. Even though he'd obeyed a legal command, the board could still label him dangerous. That would mean a muzzle in public, pricey liability insurance, the works. We spent the weekend gathering everything we could, letters from neighbors and teachers about Zeus's gentle nature, vet records showing he'd never been aggressive, and training certifications proving he only responded to specific protection commands and always stopped on recall. During my second therapy session, I broke apart. I described the look on my wife's face that morning, the way she grabbed my arm, desperate to tell me, and how I brushed her off to go flip hamburger patties. My therapist said predators spot dynamics like that. Sophie knew exactly who to manipulate and who would second guess. She knew I'd be the weak link. Detective Wainwright kept digging. She found 2 other families who'd filed complaints about Sophie through the same babysitting app. They'd noticed odd behavior but hadn't pushed charges. Now Wainwright was interviewing them to build a pattern. Sophie hadn't just targeted us, she'd been testing the waters in multiple households. My parents started therapy too, meeting with a trauma specialist. My dad admitted he'd been having violent thoughts, imagining doing to Sophie what she'd done to my kids. My mom, though, she was still spinning in circles. One day raging at Sophie, the next begging for some explanation that didn't put the blame squarely on her daughter. Then came the journal. Wainwright sat me down at the station with a stack of pages, and for 3 hours I read Sophie's handwriting, my sister's handwriting, detailing how she'd groomed Olivia and Ben. She'd written about recording Olivia crying during bath time, then editing the audio to make it sound like my wife was hurting her. She'd scribbled notes about which bruises from normal kid roughhousing she could photograph and twist into evidence. Receipts showed she'd even bought audio equipment specifically for framing my wife. Every page was a gut punch. I had to keep stopping, because all I could see was the girl who once taught me to ride a bike, the sister who stayed up late quizzing me for my SATs. And now here she was in ink, describing how to destroy my wife and steal my kids. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed nonstop. Someone had posted about the barbecue in our neighborhood Facebook group. 200 comments in hours. Some people calling my wife a hero, others calling her insane for using the dog. A few even hinted she must have planted the evidence. I wanted to rage at every single one of them, but Wainwright warned me, stay off social media. Don't feed the fire. That afternoon we met with prosecutor Esteban Rarin. He warned us, Sophie's defense would go hard on the dog attack. Why didn't my wife call the police first? Why unleash Zeus? Rarin showed us the neighbor's video, clear as day, Sophie reaching for the butcher knife. That was our defense, imminent threat. He had witnesses lined up too, 2 neighbors ready to testify they saw Sophie's hand moving toward the knife. The animal control hearing for Zeus came fast. Our lawyer laid out everything, Zeus obeyed only one command, then stopped the second my wife said, heel. 15 neighbors submitted letters about his gentle nature. Our vet testified he'd never shown aggression. Dog park regulars swore he'd always been playful and safe. Piece by piece, we built the case that Zeus wasn't a danger, he was a protector. Meanwhile, CPS sent us Carlos Pike's updated report. He said both kids were showing trauma symptoms but responding well to therapy. Olivia was starting to open up in sessions. Ben was processing through play therapy since he was still too young to articulate everything. Pike emphasized keeping routines stable, maintaining the no-contact order with Sophie, and reinforcing family trust. That's where Chia Bergman came in. She gave us tools, daily 5-minute check-ins where my wife and I shared something we noticed about each other. Exercises for family bonding. She said Olivia needed to see us believing her, protecting her. Ben needed consistency, routine, safety. 2 weeks later, Sophie's defense attorney filed a motion claiming my wife had planted the journal, since she had access to Sophie's overnight bag. Rarin countered fast, Sophie's fingerprints were on every page. A handwriting expert confirmed it matched her old birthday cards and letters. Entries were written in different colored inks over months. The judge looked downright irritated at the defense, shutting the motion down. That night I sat across from my wife and finally said the words I'd been choking on. I apologized, not just for that morning but for every Thursday night, every time I ignored her instincts, every time I brushed her off. I told her I wasn't asking for forgiveness, I didn't deserve it. But I wanted her to know I saw it now and I would never ever dismiss her again. She cried into my shoulder, admitting she'd been terrified I might take Sophie's side. I held her close, both of us broken but clinging to each other. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "We're getting through this. No big speeches. Just us." The day after everything blew up, my parents came over. The air was heavy, their faces drawn tight, and the apology was as awkward as it was overdue. My mom admitted she'd been in denial about Sophie. My dad nodded along, saying they were ready to testify for the prosecution if needed. But the prosecutor had already told us their testimony wouldn't be necessary. They hadn't witnessed the abuse itself. The conversation was stilted, full of long silences where no one knew what to say. Painful, but at least it was a start. 3 weeks later came Sophie's preliminary hearing. Detective Wainwright stood at the front of the courtroom, laying out a timeline that nailed Sophie to the wall, metadata from the videos matching the exact dates she babysat. Then Ramona Conrad's forensic interview report was submitted. The defense objected, but the judge allowed it. That's when Sophie's attorney stood up, pointing at my wife like she was the criminal. He argued she'd planned the whole dog attack, claiming Zeus only responded to special commands, so it had to be premeditated. The prosecutor didn't waste a second. He played the neighbor's cell phone video on the big screen for the court. Sophie's hand clear as day reaching for the butcher knife. Her fingers curling around the handle. My wife frozen 10 feet away. The room leaned forward in collective silence, the video played not once, not twice, but 3 times. The judge scribbled notes before saying, "The evidence clearly shows Sophie reaching for a deadly weapon, creating reasonable fear of imminent harm." 2 days later, we were back in court. This time, the prosecutor opened a cardboard box filled with photos from Sophie's storage unit. He laid them out like a sick gallery, photos of the furnished child's bedroom, stolen toys from our house neatly on shelves, even school uniforms laid out on the bed. There were our house keys hanging on labeled hooks, our alarm code written on index cards. The judge's face hardened with every picture. Sophie's attorney tried to argue someone else could have planted those items, but the storage manager testified Sophie was the only one with access. Security footage showed her carrying bags into the unit every week after babysitting. When the journal came up again, Sophie's lawyer tried the same tired motion. "My wife could have forged the entries." The prosecutor countered with a handwriting expert who matched Sophie's scrawl to job applications and letters from years back. A fingerprint analyst showed Sophie's prints on every page, layered exactly how a writer would leave them. The judge looked irritated, ruling the journal authentic, different inks where marks, months of entries. Impossible to fake. After that, we were ushered into a conference room while the prosecutor and Sophie's attorney hammered out terms. 2 hours later they told us, Sophie could take a deal. Plead guilty to all state charges, avoid federal prosecution, serve 15 years with mandatory treatment and lifetime sex offender registration. In exchange, she'd waive all civil claims over the dog attack. The offer expired at 5 p.m. The next morning, Sophie walked into court in an orange jumpsuit, her arm still in a sling from Zeus's bite. Her attorney announced she was accepting the deal. During her allocution, she stood at the podium, reading from a statement where she admitted everything. She claimed she never meant to hurt the kids, that she loved them. I wanted to vomit right there. The judge accepted the plea. 15 years. No early release for at least 5. Lifetime registry. But Zeus's future still hung in the balance. At the animal control hearing, the officer reviewed every shred of evidence, the neighbor's video of Sophie lunging for the knife, testimony from the dog trainer, our stack of character letters. The ruling, Zeus could stay. But with conditions. He had to wear a muzzle in public, complete another training course, we had to carry a $1 million liability policy, and animal control would inspect our home quarterly for 2 years. Even with restrictions, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Zeus had saved my kids. The trainer told the board exactly what I knew in my heart. Zeus had done his job. Nothing more, nothing less. 3 weeks after Sophie's sentencing, a letter came from the district attorney's office. It formally cleared my wife of all criminal charges. The letter said she had acted in reasonable defense of others in the face of imminent harm. The relief washed over us like a tidal wave. We sat on the couch holding each other, crying without words for an hour. We knew people would still judge. But the law was on our side. Meanwhile, the kids kept seeing Dr. Bergman twice a week. She gave us daily exercises to rebuild their sense of safety. After 2 brutal months of night terrors, Ben finally started sleeping through the night again. Olivia, slowly but surely, stopped panicking when we left the room. Small steps, but to us they felt monumental. My parents completed a 6-week grandparent boundaries course CPS required before supervised visits. They practiced phrases and responses until they could handle triggers without making things worse. Their first visit took place at a community center with a social worker watching. The kids were cautious, happy but hesitant, constantly looking at us for reassurance before hugging them or answering questions. As for my wife and me, we dove into couples therapy. The therapist forced us to strip everything down. Daily 5-minute check-ins where we weren't allowed to talk about the kids or work. Just us. One observation about each other every day, no matter how small. We made a pact that any concern, any gut feeling, no matter how vague, gets immediate attention. No more brushing things off. No more later. Because later had almost destroyed us. 2 weeks later, HR called me into a meeting. They looked tense, sliding a folder across the table. Reporters had been trying to contact my coworkers. 3 different ones had already shown up at the office pretending to be clients, and another had even called reception pretending to be a vendor. HR wasn't playing games. They showed me the company-wide email they were about to send. Any employee contacted about my family situation was to report it immediately, and security would take over. They also handed me a new badge. It gave me access through the executive entrance so I could slip in and out without running into anyone waiting in the main lobby. The next morning, reality hit hard. A reporter sat in her car right outside our house, snapping pictures as my wife buckled the kids into the car. My stomach dropped. I walked straight up, pulled out my phone and snapped photos of her license plate. She rolled her window up fast and sped off, but sure enough, by that afternoon she was parked across the street again. We called the non-emergency police line. An officer came out, told her she couldn't sit there without being a resident, and she drove away. But deep down we knew she'd just circle the block and find another spot. That weekend, a security company came to install cameras on every corner of the house, plus motion sensors that sent alerts to our phones. The installer even showed us how to run monthly sweeps with a special scanner that beeped if it picked up hidden mics or cameras. We let the kids help redecorate their rooms to make them feel safe again. Olivia picked purple curtains with little stars, while Ben wanted dinosaur wall stickers. They were excited about it, smiling while they helped, but I noticed Olivia double-checking that her curtains closed tightly every night, and Ben once asked, "Can bad people see through walls?" My wife and I took turns with the scanner every month, sweeping every wall, every piece of furniture, while the kids were at school. For months after that barbecue from hell, we decided to try something small, a family dinner. Just my parents and my brother-in-law. My mom brought her famous casserole. My dad helped set the table, trying not to look nervous every time his eyes flicked to Zeus. The muzzle was on, but Zeus wagged his tail, sitting right at my feet like he knew he was on duty. The kids were excited to see their grandparents. Ben showed off his dinosaur collection, though he stuck close to my wife's side the whole night. We talked about the weather, about my brother-in-law's new job. Nobody said Sophie's name. Nobody mentioned what had happened. Zeus stayed calm, and when the kids asked if they could give him treats, we let them feed him through the special opening in his muzzle. After everyone left, I walked into the kitchen and found my wife quietly crying as she loaded the dishwasher. I wrapped my arms around her, whispering thank you again for protecting our kids when I had failed to listen that morning. She squeezed my hand and told me we didn't need big speeches. We were getting through this. Together. The protective orders against Sophie would last for years, and she was serving her sentence with no chance of early release for at least 5. We told the kids in the simplest way possible that Aunt Sophie was sick, that she had to go away to get help, and that she could never come near them again. They seemed to understand. And that was enough for us. Therapy stayed steady for all of us. Dr. Bergman said we were doing well as a family, stronger boundaries, clearer communication. My parents respected the strict visitation rules CPS set, and slowly, we started trusting them again during supervised visits. The kids surprised us with how resilient they were. Olivia joined an art class at the community center. She painted flowers, houses, whole worlds brighter than what she'd lived through. Ben started preschool soccer, running wild in the backyard kicking his ball, with Zeus, muzzle and all, watching from behind the fence like his own personal referee. Sure, there were setbacks. Nights when Olivia broke down in tears, mornings when Ben had accidents. But more and more there was laughter again. And hearing that laughter in the house, it made everything worth it. 6 months after that terrible day, no, we weren't over it. You don't get over something like this. But we were living. The kids were safe. Sophie was locked away, unable to hurt anyone. My wife and I were stronger, closer. Zeus, muzzle and all, was still our hero, still the best dog. At the park, other owners nodded when they heard he was a trained protection dog. Most said the same thing, they'd have done the exact same thing to protect their kids. Our new normal wasn't perfect. But it was ours. And we were making it work, one day at a time. Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.